All right, so today I want to start by bringing up something that came out a couple days ago, and it's Justin Trudeau announcing support for black entrepreneurs. So basically, what they did is they're giving, I think it's like $220 million to support black entrepreneurs. Now, I don't think it's a terrible policy. The only problem being is that why are we giving it to just people of one skin color, right? Because I mean, this is the problem with the left is that they are the real racists, right? Like, um, um, not that there isn't any racist on the right, but the left, people on the left are pretty much exclusively racist. Not that they wake up in the morning and think, how can we mess with black people? The biggest way that the left is racist is the bigotry of low expectations. That, oh well, if we have no welfare state, then blacks aren't going to be able to keep up. And if we don't, you know, have the standards lower for blacks getting into college, and when you look in the states too, they have the left has this idea that we can't have voter ID laws because blacks are too stupid to go know how to go get an ID. Like, that's basically what their argument is. Um, and that's the problem. It's the bigotry of low expectations. And um, blacks aren't as intelligent as whites on average, or Asians, but they're not that dumb, right? Like again, the left vehemently denies the IQ stuff, which is pretty set in stone science. But yet they by default believe in it by wanting all this kind of stuff. Now, I believe this is simply just a token of virtue signaling. The liberals have been embroiled in another big scandal recently, so they're trying to desperately change the tone of what people are talking about. So it's, hey, let's toss some money at the blacks, right? Because again, they need the overwhelming majority of them to vote for them to get reelected, right? So that's why they do this kind of stuff, is simply for the votes, right? Like they want immigration not because it improves the country, because they want the votes, right? Like they can't win, or at the very least they couldn't win by winning over the existing population. So over the last generation or so, they've been just flooding the West with immigrants from the third world. And it's like I said before, I'm not against immigration outright. I'm just against mass immigration, and I'm against immigration that exists to keep wages down and to provide votes for the left. I mean, those are the two main reasons that immigration exists these days. It has nothing to do with improving Canada or diversity or any of that garbage. The left doesn't believe in diversity. Again, that's just another way of them to virtue signal, right? Like, so anyway, this is, and like the last thing I guess I wanted to bring up is, why is it okay nowadays to be openly like, this is a racist policy by definition. Like, just imagine if Donald Trump came out and said, "Oh, we're gonna give hundreds of millions of dollars to white entrepreneurs," right? He would be vilified as, "Oh, this is confirmation he's a racist," right? But when Justin Trudeau does it the other way around, um, then it's perfectly okay. And the left justifies it with the whole bigotry of low expectations things, that, oh, blacks need it because of racism. Well, you've yet to prove that said racism exists, right? Like, they've yet to prove any of that. So again, that's just the insanity of modern times, I guess. And the next thing is also from Paul Mitchell here, and he says, um, not going to micromanage your way out. Kenny shuts down idea of more virus restrictions in Alberta. Keep it up, Patriots. Our message is starting to get through. We will not accept living in a medical police state. Time for freedom to return. Now, this is a big thing, too. A lot of people think we're out of the woods, but there's increasing calls for I don't think that, I'm not necessarily sure that people want another lockdown, because I think anybody with half a brain literally at this point realizes the lockdowns are a complete and utter failure. They caused far more harm than good. So what they're going to do is they're going to call for other stuff. They're going to call for the mandatory contact tracing and more mandatory mask laws and all that kind of, I mean, if a vaccine comes out, there'll be calls for that to be mandatory. Like, that's what the calls are going to be for in the coming months, and maybe even years, for all we know. Because again, I wouldn't put it off them to relock down. I mean, they have relocked down in other areas. I mean, you look at Australia and New Zealand. Um, but I think, like I say, anybody with half a brain realizes it didn't work. It had little to no effect on the spread. and it had numerous negative ramifications on the economy and on people's well-being. And I think the people who argue against all those things are literally borderline insane at this point, like seriously borderline insane. And because it's affected me and so many people around me, it is a personal thing as well too. So the minute that things get personal is the point to where I'm not going to stay silent anymore. I really don't care. Like the lockdowns were, they did nothing, right? Like, and if they did have an effect, it was so small that it was barely even measurable, right? And it didn't even come close to making up for the difference of all the negative ramifications that it caused. So I'm happy that Jason Kenney has um, poo-pooed the calls for more restrictions. I mean, he should be, talking about getting rid of these stupid mandatory mask laws, but um, that's not the end of the world with the whole mandatory mask stuff. I mean, I'm vehemently against it. I think it's stupid. There's no evidence that it works, but I think locking down is even worse at this point. So, and not to mention too, there's all the paranoia going on with the schools too. Like you got CBC and all these crazy mainstream media outlets and people that are actually all paranoid about it. Like again, there was um, 11,000 kids tested positive at universities in the States last week, and not one of them ended up in the hospital. Or like not one of them ended up in the hospital. So the people, any parent that's concerned about, oh, we don't have this safety protocol, or I don't feel safe, or I don't think my kids feel so, like you are paranoid, right? Like the guy on the street corner with the sign saying the end is nigh, preaching about the end times, is no more paranoid than these parents. Like no more. And again, I don't care if I insult people. Like seriously, like I said, it's something that is very personal at this point. So again, I don't care if I insult people at this point. So anyway, and not to mention too, most of the people watching this probably agree with it. So anyway, um, this is from Pierre Poilievre, and he says the Green Energy Act made vast fortunes for Liberal insiders by doubling Ontario's electricity bills. Imagine how many Liberals will become fabulously wealthy from the $50 billion in new green corporate handouts. Now, again, you have these leftists in Alberta that rail against the corporate handouts that go to the oil companies, which I'm against to an extent. I just think that they blow it out of proportion. And not to mention, too, the oil companies probably would not need any subsidies if you didn't have crippling regulations on their businesses. So that's the other thing too. But again, where are they on this kind of stuff? Again, when they give again, if you're not against corporate handouts in all forms, then I could care less about you complaining about your complaining about the stupid oil companies getting um, corporate handouts. Like I could care less, right? And the fact that they don't bring that kind of stuff up just goes to show that their belief system is, yeah, when our team does it or gets it, it's perfectly fine. But when it's their team, it's the worst thing in the world, right? Like every politician does this kind of stuff. Like, I mean, pretty much every politician. Like, again, you try and tell these people this stuff, and they're actually naive enough to think that it's not the case. Like, of course they do. Like, the NDP in Alberta hired, what was it, thousands or even tens of thousands of more government workers. Like, the government, we had a balanced budget for what 40, 50 years in Alberta, and we got by perfectly fine without those government workers. But the minute the NDP get elected, that's when we need all these government workers that again are overwhelmingly going to vote for the NDP and overwhelmingly going to give money to the NDP. Like of course they do that same stuff. Like again, if you're going to deny that, then there's no point in even having a conversation with these people because they're so naive it's not even funny. Right? And the reason that they deny it is that they perceive it as benefiting them, so that's why they're quiet about it. And again, the difference being is that again, oil companies are struggling these days, partly due to the oil prices not being as high, um, but it's very relevant as well, the fact that we have crippling regulations in Canada as well. Like, are these oil companies in Iraq, are they losing as much money, or are they making more money? Of course they are, right? Because they don't have stupid regulations there. So yeah, that's the other thing to bring up. And again, green energy companies, not only do they not have crippling regulations on them, they get subsidies, right? Like, um, so the green energy companies already have a massive advantage, right? And they still can't even compete. So anyway, the last thing I wanted to bring up is this stupid story that was going around recently. Sociopathic traits linked to not wearing a mask or social distancing during pandemic. study. And again, I'm not even going to read to it. Number one, I could care less about what the study says because it's wrong. I mean, it's wrong by definition, in that there's no evidence that masks work. Like I've yet to see people point to studies that prove that masks work. Like I've literally had people, um, gotten debates with people and had them link to me studies, and the study's conclusion was masks don't work, right? Like the studies that these people point to are entirely anecdotal. Like they're in, oh, Japan did pretty good and they wore masks, therefore masks work. Like that's simply a correlation study. That doesn't mean causation. Sweden didn't have masks and they're perfectly fine. South Dakota didn't have massive mask wearing and lockdowns and they were perfectly fine. Um, so again, I think it's they've completely lost the debate, and this is what the left loves doing: is that once they lose the debate, which usually happens pretty quick, they immediately resort to this kind of stuff. I mean, that's why they're putting out all these stories when it comes to Trump. Is that up until this point, the Biden has been looking pretty good. I mean, I don't think he was actually truly ahead at any point, but I think it was neck and neck for a while. But given the fact that recently he's the polls have clearly swung in Trump's favor. At this point, I think it's very clear, unless something changes, Trump is going to win, and he's going to win pretty easily. So this is why they've gone to this whole, Trump hates veterans. He was mocking veterans, and some new rape allegation comes up. Like this is what they do. Like when they lose the argument, they do stuff like this, and it's the same stuff here. Like um, you wouldn't need to post crap like this if you'd actually won the debate, right? Like if they actually won the debate, they would simply be pointing towards the studies that actually prove the lockdowns and mask wearing. I mean, so again, social distancing was a concept that was come up by, with a kid in high school for, I think it was a high school science project, came up with the idea. There's no controlled studies that I'm aware of that prove mask wearing is effective, or social distancing. And this is the thing too, that for the entirety of medical history, um, mask wearing was not recommended. Like we had decades of research showed that mask wearing did not prevent anything. And these people genuinely believe that within a matter of a month, the entirety of the scientific knowledge that existed literally flipped entirely on a head, or like almost overnight. Like that's not how science works. Like we don't go from we didn't go from um, the Earth is the center of the solar system to it isn't the center of the solar system like overnight, right? Like it was something that slowly but surely we picked up on, right? Like it was something that slowly but surely, what was his name, Galileo, I think it was, he would have picked up on. Like he would have made the calculations to where hey, this doesn't make sense, if this is happening like that, and eventually they would have figured out, yeah, Earth is in the center of the solar system, right? Like it doesn't happen overnight. And studies don't happen overnight either. It takes a while to do these kind of studies, and the fact that things just changed on a dime. And this is the thing too, that these studies that they point to, they all just magically came out like in end of May and in June, right? Like right at around the time to where people were starting to realize that. I mean, me, it was quite a bit sooner, but the average person was starting to realize, hey, the lockdowns are complete BS, they're complete bunk. Then all of a sudden these the mask wearing studies come out, right? So it was rather convenient timing, and again, I don't believe it for a second. So anyway, that's the last thing I wanted to bring up. So if you liked the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, on BitChute, and on Parler. All those links are in the description, so you can find them all there.